So in this paper, I look at communication through negotiations. And I thought this was an important topic because the very crux of negotiations is based on verbal, interpersonal, sometimes written, sometimes body language, but purely communication. It's a complete social, psychological tool, construct that is strictly communication-based. In this paper, we look at the art and science of negotiation, the importance of training negotiators, how more training is needed, seeing that it's a skill set, it's not just run-of-the-mill ability to communicate. There's negotiation between two parties and multi-parties, the different challenges that arise between two parties versus multi-party negotiations, how you must define your audience in negotiations, and the short-term and long-term perspective of what each client or each party in the negotiations is looking for. We look at the social psychology and bargaining of negotiation, the terms and order of operations. There's dilemmas of trust and dilemmas of openness and honesty that negotiators must be trained for. We talk about the breakdown of exactly what should be done first, second, and third within the negotiation process. We look at a more analytical framework through game theory. Game theory that's been shown that much behavior that might at first seem irrational or foolish can actually be explained by rational decision making. We'll look at the lens of game work and analytics in which to view negotiation, although I somewhat have a personal problem with this framework as it kind of zaps the inherent communication factor and attempts to make it more prescriptive and analytical. But nonetheless, we look at that. Communication and negotiation through the language that's used, how certain language can make it feel like there's hostage negotiation, the use of intense verbal language, we want versus we should, the immediacy of language, something too direct in the communication can lower the positive effect that it shows on the party that's being spoken to, how repetition can actually reaffirm the commitment of the other party and give off a high power language style, which we discuss what high power language style versus low power language styles are, and how to steer clear of intensifiers. For example, this is an extremely good deal. The word extremely can indicate that you're overselling the potential promise that you're trying to make. And obviously no threats. Threats immediately zap the trust, which we also get into. We talk about power in negotiation, how power inequality among the negotiators or among the parties themselves can be quite problematic, as those with high power tend to behave more exploitively and the less powerful tend to be more submissive and therefore take less than they actually should. When the power is more equally distributed, there's a more effective negotiation, and hopefully the negotiator themselves is well trained enough that they can figure out a way in which to kind of levy the power in between the two parties and create a more equal playing ground. Because the more cooperative and motivational the orientation of the negotiations are versus the competitive motivations, the more likely the settlements are successful, and that you're able to steer clear of the domination or inaction or withdrawal that is always potential in negotiations. We see the importance of how one party winning isn't the point of the negotiation, and how power connotates winning, and this plays a challenging role in allowing there to be asymmetry in the negotiation process. When really the goal of negotiation is that both parties get some of their needs met in a way that satiates them both. We talk about trust, the interpersonal versus the intrapersonal, how the interpersonal can affect power and gender, how the interpersonal can affect economic, social, psychological foundations, and how mutual trust is essential to steer clear of the deceptive tactics that are really harmful to negotiations. When somebody allows the negotiator to be a trustworthy person, this allows the exchange of information between the negotiator and both parties to flow more freely. And distrust means that they're less likely to share information, they're less likely to ask questions, they're more skeptical and suspicious, twisting the negative counterparts of these negotiation tactics doesn't allow an integrative agreement to be achieved. Trust violations, however, are pretty common, considering that most negotiations are mixed motive negotiations, typically, and especially when one party stands to gain more economically than the other, there's more likelihood for there to be lies told or manipulations made in order to garner the outcome that they desire. And as challenging as it is to get to a place where the negotiator and the parties are trusted, it's even more to almost nearly impossible to rebuild that trust once it's been broken. We look at the two-party system, how there's a two-party distributive system, which is, in this case, there's a non-cooperative, it's a win-lose system. There's also the two-party integrative system, which is what negotiations attempt to find. So the two-party distributive system would be something more like law. There's a winner, there's a loser. Someone gets the outcome they want and someone doesn't. The two-party integrative system, the win-win system, is what negotiations attempt to find. Through that system, you must design the negotiation and figure out what must be decided. There's an evaluation process to figure out what you need and what you want. There's an analysis of finding joint compromise, behavioral realities of how these people actually interact in negotiations. And then, of course, the non-cooperative others and how to tackle non-cooperative adversaries. Gathering information, preparing strategy, all of that's talked about in the two parties section. Then we talk about persuasive argumentation. Persuasive argumentation sees negotiation as an ill-structured and complex process that defies analysis. So kind of going back to game theory, persuasive argumentation attempts to make negotiation more of an analytical-based processes. It believes that the interaction of participants during negotiation engenders change in their goals, and it's the process used to cohere the behavior of the parties and guide the process towards solution, convergence. They think that to negotiate effectively, agents need the ability to represent and maintain belief models, reason about other agents' beliefs, and influence other agents' beliefs and behaviors through an analytical framework. Again, I'm weary of making the process of negotiation too analytical, as I think that it takes away from the inherent value of the pure baseline negotiation communication skills. Then we talk about competitive communication. So in the language section, we talked about how certain terms and tones and speech can be harmful, but competitive tactics are actually very helpful in the negotiation process, and those come through imposing time tactics to persuade their audience, to appear firm through large initial demand, and to slowly make the concessions necessary, also to implore positional commitments, to tie it into an ethical or religious principle, and to use persuasive arguments to reduce the resistance of others through promises or improving relationships with the other party, basically buttering up the other party, just pure garnering of the other party's mood. Finally, we talked about high effective communication versus low effective communication, how to increase persuasiveness of a low prestige communication